Happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm making this video and I apologize that there are two very noisy 5-year-olds in the background who will probably interrupt us, but I wanted to help you navigate the work we're going to do during our extended vacation. So when you scroll down here in the assignments folder, past the work we've already done, I have our first, what I'm calling COVID folder for March 17th, and our second Guide to Literary Theory, which comes directly after this for a reason. The Guide to Literary Theory will help you understand the critical terms that I have listed on the syllabus, because as we study Elizabeth Bishop and some other works for the rest of the semester, we will also get a bit of an introduction to literary theory. This is a really excellent online version. So for today, we're looking at Marxism and cultural studies and Elizabeth Bishop's poem, The Filling Station. If you look over the Marxism definition here, you will see some important definitions that describe Marxist literary criticism. And to be a Marxist literary critic does not mean one is a communist. Rather, it means that you look at the material conditions that affect the production of literature or art within an historical context. And that's primarily what I do as a literary critic. So I don't use these terms very often in my writing, but if you read through the key terms here and the brief description, you'll understand Marxism rather well. Society has a base, which includes the workers, and the superstructure, which are the ideological systems, our values, our art, and our legal processes that we create as a society. Marxism goes along with the idea of social construction. Marxism is important because it doesn't look only at what we would call high art or art produced by wealthy, influential people, but rather considers something like reggae music, which is not often created by wealthy people, or graffiti art, or even country music. So, Brandy, for your insistence that Taylor Swift is an artist, the Marxists will have your back. And the cultural studies scholars will also, because cultural studies is a form of Marxist cultural criticism that investigates the relationship between a person and that person's society. Now, please look over the Introduction to Modern Literary Theory and refer to it as much as you need to, but I'm not going to read it to you. So, to understand cultural studies, I have connected us to this article about a man named Stuart Hall, who is a Jamaican scholar. He has passed away, but he started to really shape the field of cultural studies, and he was a professor at the University of Birmingham in England, and he made the way for us to not only study popular culture, but to think about culture as something that we create and that we construct. And the idea of social construction, that we develop values, understandings of how the world works, and understandings of our own identity, such as our gender or our race or our nationality or our class, key in very closely with cultural studies. So Hall criticized the authenticated, validated tastes of the upper classes and the idea that other kinds of culture were unrefined, that kind of snobbery. I'm going to scroll down really quickly here to one of the last points about Stuart Hall, which is important, that culture is about self-fashioning and how we make ourselves. And finally, this idea that what is there and what is real, and the possibility of being someone else is always available to us because we have what one would call agency as subjects of culture. We can kind of create our reality to a certain extent. So that's just a little tiny bit about Marxism and cultural studies. Now, as we discuss the first poem today, which is Elizabeth Bishop's Filling Station, I will talk to you a little bit more about Marxist and cultural studies readings of this poem. They will be different from the kind of new critical readings that we have been taking part in. New criticism, as you can see here, is a literary method from the South, primarily in the 20s and 30s, in which we never thought about the author's intentions, we never thought about feeling or affect, and that you have to always read very closely, shall we say. Close reading is a new critical approach. I use close reading extensively with Marxism and cultural studies, which is kind of funny because the two things, if you put the people who started both of those movements in a room together, they would come to blows, shall I say. They would fight it out. So, going back to the syllabus, here's our today's folder. Here's the Guide to Literary Theory. And in today's folder, I've included some, as I just showed you, this article about Stuart Hall, a group of poems from a book by Bishop. This is one of the first Bishop images before I realized that I should just insert them as images. As you can see, Elizabeth Bishop was a poet as well as a visual artist, yet she didn't think of herself as a visual artist, and she did not intend for her visual art to hang in a museum, and almost all of her art is 6 by 9 inches or smaller, very miniature. And most of the settings are either pastoral scenes or small town or sometimes even city scenes that are hidden by electrical wires and trees, which is a little odd, or these kind of domestic scenes that we also might refer to as still lifes. And a still life is a picture of a table in which usually the contents are spilled and there's a bowl of pears, things like that. Here in Table with Candelabra, we also have a mirror that is not reflecting anything. And we have a newspaper that's been read, as you can see, and things are a little crooked and askew. It's not just my bad photography. So I would still say, though, that the subject of this, it's a birthday card that she made for one of her friends, is kind of domestic. You know, an interior small painting of a table with flowers. So it has a somewhat feminine quality too, maybe. Of course, the idea of something being feminine is a social and cultural construct. It's an idea that we give meaning and value to by defining it as such. Someone else might argue that this is really masculine, and that is perfectly okay because the meanings we give to feminine and masculine, or man and woman, are what makes them. Now, the other images I've included, and this is the actual size of the image, which is, in this case, I believe less than 6 by 9. Again, she made this as a birthday card, a little vase with some flowers in it, a black background, also on a table with this tiny magic stove on it. And here we have a grater hanging on the back of the tiny stove. This looks like black beans and this looks like rice to me. And, you know, the tiny little bricks. She loved to make bricks with this new kind of bright white, optic white paint. She really liked the optic white paint. But you do maybe get the idea of this table being a little dirty or worn. And it's very strange because she likes to draw these old-fashioned wood-burning stoves. And she's a modernist. Then here is a picture of a meadow. And again, just something given to one of her friends. Very abstract. And this another interior space, an old-timey wood-burning stove, an big old cast iron teapot, but a chair and a side table that have a little bit of a modernist aesthetic because they're spare and simple. They're not Victorian. Some tiny pictures hanging on the wall. And then this mobile, which I believe she names the artist who made these mobiles, and I think it might be her creating a picture of a famous artist's mobile. But it's, you know, those things that hang with string with stuff attached to them. So again, this is a very modernist piece of art, and the fact that she places it in this kind of homey domestic space alongside what looks a little bit like some of her paintings, and again, always with her flowers and with these little stoves, is just a little bizarre and wild. I don't know what inspired her to create these pieces, but I think they're an interesting text that goes along with her poems, which are also tiny and intricate and kind of mixing the old and the new and very specific. It's interesting that many poets like to paint because they do want their words to be as intentional and specific and delineated as the brush strokes that they use to make their paintings. And Bishop particularly is known for hanging a poem, a draft of a poem over her desk, which supposedly hung there for 10 years until she could find just the right word for the last line of a 10-line poem. So the very careful use of language and also the very imagistic, vivid, not necessarily colorful, but tonal use of language is something I also encourage you to work on when I say use active verbs, use specific descriptive nouns, paint me a picture, show me what you're talking about. And perhaps this is part of why I love Elizabeth Bishop so much. Now, again, when we think about Marxism or cultural studies, these are also humble, very humble images. A traditional still life might be on a king's table, but these things are homey, almost like things you'd find at Dollywood. Not high art. You know, this is not, does not seem to me like a wealthy person's home. So it's giving credence to the vulgar, the mundane, the everyday, the unrefined. As unrefined as Bishop's paintings are, they're some of my favorite paintings in the world. Maybe it's just my prejudice because I love Elizabeth Bishop's poetry too. So if you notice, I forgot to add the PDF for the Bishop poems here. So when I do things like that, what you need to do is go back to information and open the syllabus again. Or so we'd like to think. And apparently it's being updated, so it refuses to open. Okay. Love wasting time. Okay, any day that the file wants to open, that would be super fun. All right, remember this, it's our syllabus. We have really stuck to it, believe it or not. And on this digital version of the syllabus, you can find some of the links to the texts that we read. I believe this Dalloway is wrong and I fixed it in Blackboard, but not yet on the syllabus. So here is a digital link to Elizabeth Bishop's poem, Filling Station. And it starts with an exclamation. also called exclamatio. Oh, but it is dirty. This little filling station, oil-soaked, oil-permeated to a disturbing overall black translucency. Be careful with that match. Father wears a dirty, oil-soaked monkey suit that cuts him under the arms, and several quick and saucy and greasy sons assist him. It's a family filling station, all quite thoroughly dirty. Do they live in the station? It has a cement porch behind the pumps, and on it, a set of crushed and grease-impregnated wickerwork. On the wicker sofa, a dirty dog, quite comfy. Some comic books provide the only note of color, of certain color. They lie upon a big dim doily, draping a tabaret, part of the set, beside a big hirsute begonia. Why the extraneous plant? Why the tabaret? Why, oh why, the doily? Embroidered in daisy stitch with marguerites, I think, and heavy with gray crochet. Somebody embroidered the doily, somebody waters the plant, or oils it, maybe. Somebody arranges the rows of cans so that they softly say "eso, so, to high-strung automobiles. Somebody loves us all. So, as you think about what you notice in this poem, there's certainly some repetition, and a very unusual repetition for sure. If we think about cultural studies, the topic of the poem, the subject of the poem, not the speaker, but what the speaker describes, certainly fits into cultural studies, low culture, looking at the everyday. And then we have the speaker who's distinguishing himself very clearly from Father in his oil-soaked monkey suit and his saucy, greasy sons. Because the question about the decor on that couch comes across to me as pretty snooty. I don't even know how to say tabaret. Okay, I guess a tabaret is a little table that you pile your crap on with wheels. Did I say it right? A low stool or small table. Tabaret. I think I might have said it correctly. Has two schwa sounds in it. Tabaret. I mean, really though, who uses words like tabaret to say small table? And then the next unusual word is hirsute. Usually when I look up these words, I remember them. Literary or humorous. So a begonia can't be literary. It's on a table with some comic books, right? And some Esso cans. It's humorous. Maybe it's funny to see a begonia next to those kind of things. Apparently it was a very popular word around the time of the Civil War and then the turn of the century, but Bishop's kind of using it in its decline. So hirsute begonia. Is it reading the comic books? Is it just funny that there's a begonia on the tabaret? And then, of course, the doily. If you remember on the, if you've read all of Maggie, A Girl of the Streets, it's not a doily. It has another fancy name. But Maggie puts some kind of silly cloth thing over the mantle, and the name escapes me at the moment since I've said hirsute and tabaret already today. And then, of course, there's that great word riposte, which comes from Virginia Woolf from the Mrs. Dalloway folder. But anyway, there are comic books, low culture. There's a dirty dog on the porch. The grease-impregnated wickerwork, like everything is greasy. And then the big hirsute begonia upon the dim doily. And this snooty speaker is saying, why? Somebody embroidered the doily, somebody waters the plant or oils it maybe, and that's just a joke. It has to be, because everything else is oily. Arranges the rows of oil cans. Esso was a very well-known brand of oil. To high-strung automobiles. If you think about the speaker probably only being at that filling station because the speaker drives an automobile versus the greasy, carefree life of the people who live on that porch when they're not changing somebody's oil. And also the contrast between masculine and feminine, which is kind of a cultural studies set of questions about this poem. The begonia, the doily, the tabaret versus the oil cans, the comic books, the greasy macho men pumping gas at all. And then, of course, the final line, somebody loves us all. So this is a great example of a poem to read from a cultural studies point of view. Let's listen to it one more time.
This one will have to be changed, as you see, somehow. I don't know how at the end, but I'll read it the way it is now. It's called Filling Station. Oh, but it's dirty, this little filling station. Oil-soaked, oil-permeated to a disturbing, overall black translucency. Be careful with that match. Father wears a dirty, oil-soaked monkey suit that cuts him under the arms, and several quick and saucy and greasy sons assist him. It's a family filling station, all quite thoroughly dirty. Do they live in the station? It has a cement porch behind the pumps, and on it a set of crushed and grease-impregnated wickerwork. On the wicker sofa, a dirty dog, quite comfy. Some comic books provide the only note of color, of certain color. They lie upon a big dim doily draping a tabaret, part of the set, beside a big hirsute begonia. Why the extraneous plant? Why the tabaret? Why, oh why, the doily? Embroidered in daisy stitch with marguerites, I think, and heavy with gray crochet. Somebody embroidered the doily. Somebody waters the plant, or oils it, maybe. Somebody arranges the rows of cans so that they softly say, Esso, so. To high-strung automobiles, somebody loves us all. I'm afraid that's wasted. No.
I'm pretty sure that the audio is Elizabeth Bishop reading, but I'm not completely sure. So I will now add our sheaf of Bishop poems and tell you just a little bit more about Bishop, because I have a feeling that this video is way too long. At least I had some pictures for you to look at. So I will go back to assignments, and I will go to our lovely COVID folder. I might put all of the first half of the semester folders into one folder just to make less scrolling down. I have to exit my preview to do this. If you see things here that you don't normally see, please don't panic. So as you know, I love to call poems a sheaf of poems. Don't ask me why. And this is another one of Bishop's paintings. I believe it's a small town in Brazil. But you see how she loves to put lines, and particularly electrical lines, in front of things. And also to put a tree, like blocking the whole view. And then we have a ton of windmills. So here is the filling station from Bishop's collected poems. And our poem for Thursday, which has a completely different tone, One Art. And then, in contrast to the free verse that we see in the filling station, we have a poem that is a sestina. And if you look up on Bob's Byway or whichever source you're using for your literary terms, you know that sestina is a very specific kind of poem. I'll read you the definition here, and then watch it not be in my book. Feel free to look at the poem while I look up the definition. Okay, a sestina is a slightly structured French verse form consisting of 6 sestets, or 6-line stanzas, and a 3-line envoy. Widely acknowledged to be one of the most complicated of verse forms, the sestina originated in medieval Provence in France, hence the tabouret. She says it the French fancy way. The 6 terminal words of the first stanza are repeated in a specific and complex pattern as the terminal words in each of the succeeding stanzas. The envoy's terminal words follow the pattern 531, and to make the form even more difficult, the other 3 terminal words from the preceding stanzas must appear in the middle of each of the 3 envoy lines in a 2-4-6 pattern. Despite the complexity of this form, poets representing diverse artistic movements and styles from different historical epochs have used it successfully, including Sir Philip Sidney, Swinburne, Rudyard Kipling, Ezra Pound, and W.H. Auden. And of course, Elizabeth Bishop. So, house, grandmother, child, stove, almanac, tears. Then tears, house, almanac, grandmother, stove, child. So you can see here how the words get repeated in a particular kind of pattern. Child, tears, stove, house, grandmother, almanac. And I am reading these in just the last line of each of the sestets. And then here we have the envoy. Time to plant tears, says the almanac. The grandmother sings to the marvelous stove, and the child draws another inscrutable house. Now, I included for you the magic stove. Possibly one of them is a marvel stove, but just to give you some visuals as you think about Bishop's repetition here and her use of imagery having to do with tears, the almanac, the teapot, and these really powerful images that were in her mind that we can see. This is the maju, or the magic stove. And then here is a different kind of cast iron stove and a cast iron teapot. And the idea of the child drawing the house versus Bishop always drawing houses or drawing interiors like this. We can talk about that some more with talking about psychoanalysis on Thursday when we look at the poem One Art and possibly a bit more of the other poems. But read Sestina and think about its structure a little bit. Maybe even try to do one of these for yourself. I'm going to make a discussion in which I want you to try your hand at a few lines in which you describe one of these images. Just because of the importance of vivid description. So look for a discussion forum, look for this video with an embedded quiz, and for probably another discussion on Thursday. Have a great day.